Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scott Bertram.
We continue a series of episodes from presentations delivered at Hoogland Center for Teacher Excellence seminars. The Hoogland Center for Teacher Excellence, an outreach of the Hillsdale College K-12 Education Office, offers educators the opportunity to deepen their content knowledge and refine their skills in the classroom. These one-day conferences are hosted during the academic year in cities across the nation and feature presentations by Hillsdale College faculty, K-12 office staff, and leaders in the Hillsdale network of member schools. There is no cost to attend, and attendees may earn professional development credits. Currently, the Hoogland Center is hosting a series exploring the art of teaching a variety of subjects. To learn more about upcoming events, visit our website, k12.hillsdale.edu.
Good afternoon. I'm here to talk to you today about principles of literacy instruction. And as Eric Kuykendall mentioned, I started my career as a high school English teacher, teaching in a traditional public school in Atlanta. I became a teacher because I loved language and reading and literature, but I was quickly surprised by how many of my high school students struggled with reading, with the basics of reading, and I wasn't really sure how to help them. And the advice I found, things like let the students choose what book they want to read or read easier books, it didn't really seem to help or be working, right? So finding classical education was a game changer for me. I became a middle school teacher in Savannah, and it was a new school, recently opened. So my seventh graders hadn't had the benefit of years of this rich curriculum and instruction that we offer. And many of them, or most of them, had been at very low performing traditional schools. So overall, the reading level was very low. And yet I was surprised to find that they loved these big, difficult, old books that we were reading. Things like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is labeled, I think, as an 11th grade reading level, right? And I found that their reading levels, their tested reading levels, improved a great deal as well. So I had one piece of the reading puzzle. My students were reading difficult text and they were immersed in learning this rich curriculum and gaining lots of knowledge. I still had some who were not growing as much, who were still lagging behind and struggled to read the words. So a few years after that, I started working with elementary school students in classes, and I had the opportunity to learn our literacy program, Literacy Essentials. This is an Orton-based program that teaches reading and spelling through writing and through a multi-sensory interactive spelling routine, right? And we teach all 72 phonograms or spelling patterns of the English language. So now I felt like I had all the tools. I had the other piece to the puzzle to help all of my students learn to read well. As I learned more about the scientific research into how we read and how reading works in the brain, I realized that these two pieces could be labeled as the simple view of reading. which was formulated in 1986. The simple view models reading comprehension as a multiplication problem. Decoding and effortless word recognition times language comprehension gives us reading comprehension. And just like in a multiplication problem, any number times 0 is still 0. If students have a problem on either side of this equation, then reading comprehension will suffer. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'd like to share with you some principles of literacy instruction. And these are things I wish I'd known when I first started teaching so that I could have better helped all of my students. First, reading is not natural, right? Humans have been speaking as long as there have been humans, right? Babies learn speech just by being exposed to language. We don't have to write lesson plans or design a curriculum in order to teach babies to speak because the human brain is wired for language. They pick it up naturally just by being exposed to it. But reading is not natural. It's only been around for 5,000 years or so. And so our brains are not wired for it in the same way that they're wired for speech. This image shows some of the earliest, oldest writing from Mesopotamia. And our alphabet, the Latin alphabet, has evolved from the first alphabet, invented by the Phoenicians, which was a big advance over the pictographs and cuneiform. And these basically arbitrary symbols that we've inherited from the Phoenicians represent the sounds of words in spoken language. So spoken language is natural, but written language is a code, right? For example, the word cat has 3 letters representing the 3 sounds of the spoken word, k-at. The word goat also has 3 sounds or phonemes, but we use 4 letters, g-oat, to represent those sounds. The word 8 only has 2 letters. It has 5 sounds representing it, right? With our literacy program, our students know the OA representing O as O, the O of boat, and the 4 letters representing A and the word 8 as A, 4-letter A. Right? So it's a code. It goes from the print to the sound, or from the sound to the print. Here is another code. Right? This one is Cyrillic. Right? This is the title of a book that I highly recommend to help your students. It's not going to do you much good, though, if you don't know the code, right? So now you have the key. Now we can break the code, right? I can look at the key, and I can see that this second letter here that looks like a B to me actually represents what we would use a V for, right? And in the second word, this house or hat looking letter represents a D. We would translate that to a D. So with the key, I can go from the Cyrillic to the Latin, or the Latin alphabet to the Cyrillic alphabet, right? Codes work both ways. So if we decode this and use our key, we come up with the title that we can understand. Here's your book recommendation. Now, you have the code to translate Cyrillic to English, but are you ready to read a book in Cyrillic? Right? Would you even want to read a paragraph written completely in Cyrillic? Probably not, because even though you have the tools in front of you, they're not automatic for you. They're not effortless. Right? We need to be able to use our code effortlessly in order to read fluently. Right? Students have to know it so well that they don't have to even think about it, and then they can just read and enjoy the story, enjoy the text. So because reading isn't natural, we have to painstakingly bolt the code onto students' brains. It's not something that they just naturally pick up, right? We can't just expose them to print and expose them to whole words and think, okay, now everyone will be able to read. The same way that we expose babies to speech, almost all of them will learn to speak. But that doesn't work for reading because it's not natural. It works for a few students. A few students seem to learn to read almost effortlessly, no matter what instructional method we use. But most students learn much, much better if we teach the code explicitly. And some students will really, really struggle and be years behind if they don't get the code taught explicitly. So a second principle, English spelling has logic and order. People tend to think that English is just chaotic, right? George Bernard Shaw even joked that we should spell the word fish as G-O-G-H-O-T-I, since GH can say f in enough, and the letter O can say I in the word women, and TI can say the sound sh in nation. Why can't we just spell the word fish as goatee? Many teachers who are charged with teaching children to read take a look at real words like the word said, he said good morning, and see that it looks like it should be pronounced said, with the A and I saying A. So we just throw our hands up and think, this is a mess. How can we teach this to children? Let's just skip it and teach them whole words. Right? But actually, English has much more logic and order and beauty than that. For example, TI does often say sh, just not at the end of a syllable, like Bernard Shaw tried to use it. Our first graders know it as sh, tall letter sh, used at the beginning of a syllable after the first one. Right? They would recognize this second syllable in enough as our spelling pattern, o, u, uf, off, all, ow, which are all 6 of the sounds that these 4 letters make in English. That sounds like a lot to memorize, right? But I actually had a group of second graders tell me just this week that it's their favorite phonogram, right? So they actually enjoy learning the rules and the order and the predictability of written text. Now, why is English so complicated in spelling as opposed to a language like Italian or Spanish, where we have more of a one-to-one correspondence between the letters and the sounds, right? The answer is in our interesting history as a language, right? English is Germanic. As you can see from this excerpt from The Wanderer from the late 7th century, Old English was very different from our modern language. In order to read Old English, we almost have to study it as a foreign language, right? But many of our most common words are Anglo-Saxon in origin. So that's the reason why we can sometimes get a strange, what seems like a strange spelling, because our language has changed so much since then. One of the biggest reasons for that change is that in 1066, the Normans who spoke French conquered England, and English spent the next 400 years borrowing lots and lots of words from French, which is a language that comes from Latin. So many of our words, probably more than half, are originally from Latin. We also borrowed a lot of words directly from Latin and to a lesser degree Greek, especially words in science and medicine, and we've borrowed from other languages as well. So from these 3 main sources, French, Latin, Anglo-Saxon, and then from other languages too, we've inherited a language with around 42 sounds, only 26 letters, and then 72 phonograms, combinations of letters. These can be a single letter or a combination of letters making one sound. Right. So it is more spelling to teach, but it's not an infinite number, 72 phonograms. Our goal for first graders and up is that they're able to read all 72 in less than 2 minutes with 100% accuracy. Furthermore, English also preserves the meanings of words. It's not only about the sound. So the word to, we don't pronounce the W, but it's there because that word shares meaning with other words that have a sense of two-ness, like twin and twice. So it used to be pronounced. And today our spelling system will preserve that sense of meaning, even if over time the pronunciations have changed. Right. So no matter how well our readers can decode, if we've taught them this code explicitly, they also need background knowledge. They need to know things about the world. They need facts in order to understand what they read. In his book, Cultural Literacy, E.D. Hirsch describes a study where they took a passage about baseball, describing a baseball game, and gave it to two groups of readers. One group of readers was high achieving. They generally scored very well on reading comprehension. The other group generally scored very poorly. They were poor readers, but they liked baseball, right? So, and the first group did not. They didn't like baseball. They didn't listen to it or watch it. So, unsurprisingly, the group that liked baseball, even though their reading scores were lower, scored much better when tested on the passage, because they had the background knowledge to understand what words like slide and out and fair and foul meant in that context. This seems like common sense, but for decades, really, too many schools have overlooked the importance of background knowledge in an effort to try to improve reading. Right. When I began teaching high school at a regular public school, I had not just one but multiple students tell me that Martin Luther King Jr. had ended slavery. Right? Yeah. For too long, schools have prioritized reading comprehension and time spent working on it at the expense of history or science or literature classes, as if reading comprehension is some kind of isolated skill that could be taught in the abstract, apart from the actual facts that we're reading about. Or they've replaced history with social studies. So students are learning about their neighborhoods, things they already know about, or they're learning abstract ideas like culture, what is culture, as opposed to learning actual facts about history. And they actually need those facts in order to understand what they read and be responsible citizens and live a full, enriched life. And children love facts, right? Elementary students especially are like little sponges, right? They have this huge sense, and all humans do, of curiosity. So the elementary years, it's the perfect time for them to soak up all of these facts that they can then use in a more sophisticated way as they're older. So therefore, we need a planned program or curriculum to teach the background knowledge in a systematic way. Mr. Kuykendall mentioned the program guide. That's where we start. That's a great place to start. That way, students aren't learning about Thanksgiving, aren't learning about the Pilgrims every Thanksgiving for 4 or 5 years in a row, or learning about Martin Luther King in January for 4 or 5 years in a row, but missing other important topics, or missing out on a sense of a timeline and how it all connects, right? So that planned sense of curriculum is very important. As an individual teacher making decisions within your classroom, when I have the freedom to choose what I'm reading, I'm going to pick a passage about the Civil War over a passage about a 4th grader's birthday party, because I want to use my instructional time to build background knowledge as much as possible. Right. Another thing that we need for effective literacy instruction is phonemic awareness, right? And we want to explicitly teach phonemic awareness to all beginning readers and also to struggling readers, right? So we said that reading is a code, the written language is a code, and reading is not a visual skill, right? It actually involves the parts of our brain that process spoken language. So young children, as they grow, as they're exposed to language play and rhyme, and as they begin to learn to read, they start to understand that sentences are made up of words, and that words are made up of syllables, and syllables are made up of sounds. Those sounds are called phonemes. This is called phonological awareness, and the most important aspect of it for reading is the phonemic awareness, right? Which is the awareness of the smallest meaningful bit of sound in a word. This is a foundational skill for reading because our brain piggybacks on the parts that process speech to process written language as well. So even though we read with our eyes, reading is not a visual process. Phonemic awareness is crucial for beginning readers because it lets them sound out words and then blend those sounds together to pronounce the word. So they will say k, at, and then they need phonemic awareness to be able to push those together and blend them together to make the sound cat, right? But the skills go further than that, right? So here's a progression starting with the easiest phonemic awareness skill to find the first sound of words, and going all the way up to the hardest, which would be substituting or exchanging sounds to make a word. So to substitute sounds, say best. Say best. Good. Now say best, but instead of s, say n. Bent is our new word, right? You have advanced phonemic awareness. Try another one. Say trust. Now say trust, but instead of s, say k. Trucked, the past tense of the verb. Good. Words with consonant blends are harder, right? And with our older readers who are struggling, you'll find that they can almost all blend three sounds to make a word. Even if they're struggling with word level reading, if they've gotten past the very lowest levels, they can do that. But they may still have deficits up here in the substitution ones that you just tried. Phonemic awareness is also important once we get past, once we can blend the words to make a sound. It's also important for all readers as the foundation of fluent reading because of a process in our brains called orthographic mapping. So orthographic means orthography is spelling, right? And mapping is mapping. So orthographic mapping, our brains look at the printed letters on the page and then they map that sequence of letters to the sequence of sounds in a spoken word that they know. This is how we're able to store a word for effortless retrieval later. So once I've orthographically mapped it in the brain, the next time I see the word, I won't have to sound it out. I can just read it effortlessly. In fact, this process is so strong that if you are an adult reader of English and you see an English word, you can't stop your brain from reading it. It reads so automatically that you just read it. It's not even like a choice. If we couldn't do this, we would be sounding out every word, kind of like how we were sounding out the Cyrillic title earlier, right? And fluent reading would be impossible. Unfortunately, this is not that far from the reality for some readers. Phonemic awareness develops naturally for most people. Not completely naturally, but in conjunction with learning to read, our phonemic awareness develops naturally. It develops throughout elementary school. But for up to or around 20% of people, it does not develop in conjunction with learning to read. So there's some degree of phonemic awareness deficit from mild to severe. And this is actually the basis of most reading problems and most reading disabilities is a very a very subtle deficit in those circuits in the brain. It doesn't show up in regular conversation for the most part, or in regular speech. It's not correlated to intelligence or demographics or parents' education. It's just a neurological tweak thing that just makes it much harder for these children to learn to read, much, much harder, and harder for them to spell, and harder to read fluently. The good news is that and it's also at the center of the definition of dyslexia, is a phonological awareness deficit that makes word reading difficult. Right. The good news is that it can be improved through explicit systematic instruction, which is why we want to provide it for all K through 1 students, even before they're ready to learn to read and write the alphabet. We need to start working on the ability to hear sounds and language, play with rhymes, play with alliteration, what's the first sound, and then start breaking apart words. What sounds do you hear in box? And working through that progression. We also need to teach it explicitly almost always for struggling readers, because that's most of the time at the root of the problem. Right. Principle 5, provide direct, explicit, systematic, and multisensory phonics instruction. Right. There's overwhelming research showing that phonics is important, more than for any other topic in education that they've researched. And the specific type of phonics that's effective is direct. So the teacher is telling the students, it's teacher-led, it's not an inquiry. We're not waiting for the students to maybe discover that the letter A says a, We're telling them directly. It's explicit, we're modeling clearly, and it's systematic. So we have a planned progression from easiest to hardest to make sure we don't miss anything. And finally, the best phonics is also multisensory. So I'd like to give you a bit of an experience with that. You'll hear it, see it, say it, and do it. So I'll briefly teach you a second grade spelling word. You just need a pen, something to write with and something to write on. And when I ask a question, we can just all answer at once, right? So our word is connect. What is our word? Connect. Readers must connect the letters to the sounds, right? Show me with your fingers, how many syllables do you hear in connect? Very good, there are 2 syllables. Connect is a think to spell word. We say connect, but we spell connect. Connect. What do we spell? Connect. Very good. Let's get ready to write the first syllable. We will use ks, or the letter C, for the first sound. Please say the sounds as you write con. Very good. Now we'll put a syllable dot, a dot to show the syllable break. Our second syllable is net. What sounds do you hear in net? Very good. Sound done right. N-ek. Good. When you have finished, put your finger under the first syllable that you wrote. What was the first syllable? Con. K. N. What was the second syllable that we wrote? Okay. Tell me the sounds. Very good. Make your paper look like mine. If you made any errors, you can fix them now. Right? And let's mark our word together. Right? So first, let's sound it how we spelled it. Very good again. But we read. Very good. So we're going to put a thinking cap or a spelling cap over the O, the A-O-U, to show that we pronounce a different sound than what it typically does. And we'll put a double underline under the first N to show that it is silent, right? Because when we say connect, we only say the N sound twice, right? Connect is a good example word of how English spelling reflects meaning and not just sounds. The first syllable con means with. Like we see it in words like contemporary or consent, right? So even though we don't pronounce each letter exactly the same, we preserve the spelling to show the meaning, right? Multisensory instruction lets students hear it, see it, say it, and write it. The writing is kinesthetic, so it's another way to learn. So systematically teaching phonics gives our students all the tools that they need. It fills their orthography toolbox. And then the multisensory instructional routine bolts the code onto their brain. It engages the whole brain so that the code is really secure and effortless, right? They also enjoy it if we're teaching it with a sense of pace and joy. Students love learning the rules. They love that sense of predictability that Dr. Copeland was talking about. They love knowing why the first N is there. It's there to close the first syllable and make the O say O, right? So they love knowing those things. It's a code that they can then use to, they now have the tools to read anything that they want, right? So now that we've taught spelling, we've taught our students the toolbox. With beginning readers, you want to use controlled or decodable text for reading practice, and for struggling readers if they need it. If they're older than first grade, but they're still reading, if they still need it, then we'll use it in intervention as well. Decodable or controlled means the text only has spelling patterns that the students have been taught, right? So they have the tools they need to decode the text. On the back of this book, you can see it's telling the teacher that we're practicing long vowels with silent final E, and we have a vowel digraph review and specifically which spelling patterns are included. This is really important because we're building strong habits and we're bolting the code onto the brain. We don't want them looking at the picture and guessing. We don't want them looking at the first letter and guessing, right? We know from research that good readers read every letter in a word. They see every letter. They're not trying to guess, right? In regular children's literature, the story might be simple, the concepts might be simple and designed to appeal to children, but the spelling patterns are quite advanced, right? They're uncontrolled. So for example, the word neighbor will appear in a lot of picture books, but a beginning reader is not going to have the tools to decode that spelling pattern. So we use decodable text for reading practice. With reading practice, you want to think about quality and quantity, right? So quality is accountability. Is there someone listening to the student to help them and make sure they're not guessing, right? The most accountable reading practice is one adult listening to one child. Of course, in a classroom, that would not give us very many minutes of reading instruction. The other variable is quantity, right? So we recommend, our Literacy Essentials recommends two methods primarily: partner reading. When you're reading with a partner, each student's reading half the time, right? And they still have some accountability because they have a partner listening to them and helping them. The other method, especially for our lowest students, is a small group of sustained quiet reading or whisper reading. So if I have 5 students, I'm listening to all 5 of them read at once, right, in a whisper voice. It may not be quite as perfect accountability, but it's 5 times the reading minutes, right? So having one student practice reading at a time is not a great use of quantity. Neither is handing them a book and telling them to go read. This is true for our struggling readers as well. With my high school reading class, I use the same format that we do with our younger students. As students are learning to decode, their teachers are reading aloud to them complex text and rich literature, right? Even after they've learned to decode, for many years, the teacher's still reading aloud to the students or with the students texts that are more difficult than they would be able to read themselves. This builds their language comprehension, it builds a large vocabulary, right? And it gives them just a great outlook on the world, on a window into the human experience and the human condition that we don't get from the decodable readers, of course. Even high school and middle school students are reading in class with their teacher texts that are more difficult than they would be able to read independently. Right? We don't want to use our class time for something like Big Nate or something that's so easy that they can just read it by themselves. It's all too common for schools today to dumb down the curriculum. We think our students have low reading levels, so we're going to give them text that's on their level, right? But that just results in them always staying at a low reading level because they're not getting the exposure to the rich vocabulary, the rich sentences that they need to be able to read harder things. It's not uncommon at the schools that I've worked at when we do get a new student who's coming from a poor educational background for them to make multiple grade levels of progress in reading skills in just 1 year, simply because they're finally being exposed to complex text. Now, we're not just going to give them the book and assign it and say, here's a really hard book, go read it. There's a difference between assigning and teaching, right? Talking is one of the best ways, and classroom conversation is one of the best ways to scaffold a text for students. It makes sense if you think about your experience as a reader. Some of the books that have stuck with you the longest, some of them may be books that you sat down and devoured on your own, but a lot of them are probably books that you read in a class or in a book club or that a friend told you about and you had conversation, right? Conversation enhances our understanding of the text. It also motivates students to read and gives them a purpose for reading. And if there's something they've missed, I had a student trying to read the word locust as in a grasshopper as lotus, the lotus flower. So she was quite confused about this theme because those two things are very different. So a quick conversation just fixed that error in comprehension and let her understand the text. So we don't have to help our students understand what they're reading, we don't have to go find a bunch of worksheets. We don't have to try to design a creative, fancy project for every chapter. We need to use conversation. We need to plan thoughtful questions and then establish procedures and rules for how conversation works in our classroom. Some ways to use text: Socratic seminar, very motivating for students, a great chance to put the thinking on them. And then within the classroom that's teacher-led, during the teacher-led lessons, you want to plan different levels of questions. We love the big picture ideas. What is glory? Why is courage hard? But in order to get to the big picture, students need lots of factual questions to help make sure they actually understand what's going on in order to interpret. We want to check for understanding frequently and informally through talk. And we want to use methods to put the thinking on the students. A great way I like to do that is called front the writing. So I'm going to ask a question, but then before I let students talk, I'll have them jot down their thinking on paper. Now I can walk around and see their answers from all of the students, right? Not just the ones who raise their hand or that I call on. And they have to think before they hear their classmates' answers, right? So this lets me see who's getting it on their own and who got it after they talked to their classmates, which is still great. We want them listening to the conversation, but we need to know what they can do by themselves as well. And it just makes them think. Sometimes they just need someone to make them, no, you actually have to stop and think about this. What is the saying? What's the big idea? Just to make them use their brains. Writing can play a similar role, and it's shown to improve reading comprehension and to reinforce the subject matter and reinforce what we're learning about. Quick writes are wonderful in class, prescribed sentences and sentence stems. So look for ways to find quality over quantity. We don't have to assign a 5-paragraph formal essay in order to use writing in our classes. We can assign those, but there are lots more ways to put writing throughout the day in our classrooms. Teach your students to outline a text. That can tell you if they're really understanding it. If they can't tell you what's the main idea this author's trying to convey, what are some details they use, then they're not really comprehending it. And annotation is a great tool as well. Because phonemic awareness is so crucial, we want to screen all students for reading and phonemic awareness problems. Early intervention is so important. So the screening helps us catch students who might have an issue that we're not seeing or that the teacher's not seeing. Students can be good students who are raising their hand, who know lots of things, who are able to tell you all of the details from your history lesson and still have a reading problem. And those reading problems can go unnoticed and will go unnoticed many times if we don't screen and assess everyone. So kindergarten and first grade students assess phonemic awareness and the basic letter sound knowledge, and then assess, in first grade and up, assess reading fluency, right? And of course comprehension as well. But from a comprehension test where my students are reading silently and then answering questions, I'm not always going to pick up on problems that they have. Last year in my reading class, I had a 10th grader who had scored in the 60th percentile on a computerized test, like state test of some kind. And I thought, how is she in my class? She's at the 60th percentile. That's above average. But as soon as I listened to her read, I could hear how effortful reading was for her and how many errors she was making. So she was a good student and she was smart. She was able to do well on comprehension. But it was much harder for her than it needed to be because she had an unaddressed reading fluency problem. So reading fluency is listening to them read, see the errors, and see how fast they go. It's kind of like a thermometer. When you go to the doctor, if you're sick, the doctor checks your temperature. It gives you a great general overview of maybe there's a problem here. If we have students scoring poorly on reading fluency, we want to assess them in more detail because struggling readers require more targeted instruction and more practice. That glitch in the neural circuits, that phonemic awareness deficit, it just means that no matter how hard some of the students work, they're just going to need more practice, and they need someone to show it to them more explicitly in a more targeted way. So I'm going to assess in more detail to pinpoint those gaps, and then use that knowledge and that data to design my intervention and design instruction, using the same explicit multisensory phonics that we talked about earlier. Here's an example. This was a first grade student. We use nonsense words because we're not trying to assess, for this particular assessment, we're not trying to assess whether they've stored the words in memory through practice. I'm trying to assess, do they know the letter sound connection, and can they blend those sounds to make a word? So nonsense words screens out kind of what they've memorized and lets us directly test the letter sound skills. This student, as you said, socks instead of os, right? He said not instead of odd. So this told me, okay, we have a starting point here to work on. You need a lot of help. This is an example from a 9th grade student who really struggled with reading. From listening to him read the nonsense words, I can see that he's reading this should be and he said He's reading as Again, as right? So now I know where to start. I know that even though he's stored a lot of words in long-term memory and he can kind of limp through a text and read something, he still has huge gaps, even in his understanding of the alphabet. Right? It's like he's trying to run a race with one leg, on one leg. He's got this big deficit. But we can address that deficit through intervention. 3 characteristics of effective reading intervention, and these come from a meta-analysis, which is a study of hundreds or thousands of studies by David Kilpatrick. The most effective reading intervention has direct, explicit, systematic phonics instruction. It has phonemic awareness instruction to an advanced level, right? Not simply segmenting 3 sound words, but to an advanced level. And of course, it has reading practice. I would also add that consistency and time are also needed. The time aspect doesn't mean you have to do 60 minutes in a day. It means overtime, weeks and months may be required. Because the students need more practice than others, don't get discouraged if progress is slow. For some of them, they just need more time. Right? So we want to also make sure we're monitoring progress regularly to see that they are making progress and adjusting instruction if we need to. The more the student struggles, the more frequently I'm going to monitor. So to kind of sum up with the simple view of reading, if we are reading difficult text with our students, if we are talking about the text and writing about the text with them, and then if we're addressing the decoding side through phonics, effective phonics, and through phonemic awareness, then our students will be strong readers. They'll have reading comprehension. Right. So thank you.
If you enjoyed this lecture, we encourage you to visit our website, k12.hillsdale.edu, for additional information on upcoming Hoogland Center events and other free resources for educators.